What I'd like to do with my time this morning to kind of finish things out before lunch is to talk about some of our experiences in the work that we've done both in the United States and in about 28 other countries around the world over the last couple of years in talking about crowdfunding and legalizing and enabling crowdfunding in those countries, but also to try to give some frameworks for how to move forward. How do we take this momentum and carry it forward with frameworks and common language for how we want to interact as regulators and entrepreneurs and investors in making this a reality. My background, I guess just to give you a little bit about who I am. I'm not a regulator, I'm not an attorney, I'm not an accountant. I am an entrepreneur. My background is as a Silicon Valley entrepreneur. I moved to the Bay Area in 1998 and was part of a number of companies that were healthcare technology companies. As part of that, management teams, we raised millions of dollars from investors, from VCs and angels, and kind of learned that process. In August of 2010, I and a classmate from graduate school were talking about the depths of the financial crisis and the fact that it was very difficult to raise capital in the best of times, and certainly at that point almost impossible. And that's at the point we created this startup exemption regulatory framework and began our work in Washington to enable crowdfund investing in the United States through equity and debt crowdfunding. The main changes to the securities laws that we made were really allowing general solicitation, allowing the ability to use the web and social media to raise money, and also the ability for regular folks, regular people who are not wealthy, to be able to, within certain limits, to be able to make investments in private companies. These numbers you've seen earlier today, just that this is a large market that's growing at an accelerating rate. These numbers come from crowdsourcing.org and are really looking at the kind of the growth rate of this market that's growing at nearly double each year. Last year, we issued a report for the World Bank in looking at how to create crowdfunding ecosystems. There was a question earlier about ecosystems for developing economies. Obviously, you know, there are different mechanics and different opportunities that work in those markets, and so we want to be able to create the ways in which that can be done effectively in developing economies. The summary, the one-line summary of that report is our belief that developing economies have an incredible opportunity to leapfrog developed economies in creating this opportunity of crowdfunding. Because in developing economies, you're weighed down by 80-some years of securities regulations and practice, and the ability to look at this as a new market, to be able to say, starting from today, as we're creating this opportunity, as is the case in Cambodia, as His Excellency was sharing earlier, the opportunity to say, from today, how will we create a securities market that enables this sharing of information online, investing online, transparency and trust online. And so we really believe that the report's available on our website. There's no charge, it's free. And so we encourage you to have a look. Another one chart from the report is just looking at these 4 elements of a robust crowdfunding ecosystem. Really, these are the kind of the pillars that are important in making this all work. Obviously, appropriate economic regulations. Second, you have to have a strong entrepreneurial culture. Third, you have to have community engagement, meaning strong social network and strong social networking utilization. And then fourth is technology. It's technology infrastructure and ICT that supports all of this to happen. And I think that it's certainly the case that all of these elements are either already present or can quickly become present in ASEAN countries. And then I think that the timeliness of this event with crowdfunding and the move for economic integration is really timely, because I think crowdfunding creates an opportunity, this new form of finance, or really an old form of finance that just has a small layer of technology on top, allows more integration to take place faster throughout ASEAN. So we really see 3 broad economic macro trends or drivers in all of this. I don't think any of these are going to be surprises to you. Number one, just that online marketplaces create this sort of opportunity for efficiency. Instead of having to, go to have 100 different venture capital meetings. You can actually post your campaign online and be able to then have that interaction once. So a huge amount of leverage that we can see. We've certainly seen this in other sorts of things like eBay Marketplace or Airbnb, for example. Second, relationships or social media. The fact that our relationships are moving from an offline and institutional kind of engagement way to an online and very individual kind of relationship. And so those kinds of trends are certainly supported by crowdfunding. And then third, we're seeing the kinds of validation in the marketplace already with the kinds of campaigns that were discussed earlier this morning, some of which I have here. I think that there's two things I want to say about this. There have been some spectacularly successful large campaigns that people have raised millions of dollars for a business or a product, and there have been some incredibly large exits. That's 1% of crowdfunding campaigns. The vast majority of these campaigns are raising, much more rational amounts of money for businesses, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe $1 million, and are typically less than 100 investors. And so I think that it's good to balance the understanding of, yes, sometimes campaigns can go viral. In the vast majority of cases, as I know is the case that Paul has shared in conversations in the past through ASOB, that there's less than 100 investors in campaigns. And so that speaks to the trust, because those are typically people you have first-degree relationships with or second-degree relationships with, and people who know something about you or the campaign that you're engaged in. So I want to talk a little bit about this crowdfunding ecosystem and what that really means. And we really believe that this ecosystem is forming today. This is a global ecosystem, but it will occur in individual countries, which over time will become linked through this global ecosystem. So first, regulation, as it becomes available, will create opportunities for businesses. So let's talk about due diligence, which was one of the issues from the panel earlier. In the United States, there are now 2 companies that provide different types of due diligence for crowdfunding companies specifically. And they will provide these to multiple companies. And they come at this issue of due diligence from different ways. Obviously, not every country has a robust credit history market, and it will have to create new ways of doing diligence or creating new ways to assess risk. And so, but the market opportunity will be large enough with crowdfunding, because for the first time there'll be more people will have access to raise capital online, that they will create business opportunities to create these ecosystem companies, like due diligence, like new ways of doing investor relations, new ways of doing accounting for these kinds of companies. So all these opportunities are available. Second, we've seen this develop before. We've seen these kinds of ecosystems before. For example, online advertising. At first, there was just people who were selling individual online advertising. Then there were platforms to aggregate that together. Then there were analytics companies to tell you how well your online advertising were doing. And then those were purchased for hundreds of millions or billions of dollars. And so if you're an entrepreneur in the room thinking about crowdfunding, I would encourage you not just to think about starting a crowdfunding platform, but think about the services that a service that you could create and then offer to every platform in the region or within your country, because there's huge opportunities there as well. And certainly in both developed economies and developing economies, there's always a need to create jobs, to create innovation, and to create entrepreneurship. Those are the messages that we used to pass crowdfunding in Washington, D.C. Those are the messages that we work with countries we're working with Mexico, we're working with Kenya, with other countries in the region, just to really talk about jobs, innovation, and entrepreneurship. And so from both a regulatory and a political perspective, those are important arguments to have. So what does this ecosystem look like? We've created a 4-sector model for how we think at least this will begin. We think that, first of all, you have to have the infrastructure for crowdfunding. And so by that I mean the crowdfunding platforms themselves and those related companies. And so we're already seeing that those are already being formed today. Number two, the issue of trust and transparency. Very important. So there'll be new technologies created here, whether it's like a socially aware investor relations tool that lets you see, like when you're considering making an investment on a crowdfunding platform, well, how many of this person's first-degree LinkedIn connections have already invested? How many second-degree LinkedIn connections have invested? How many Twitter followers do they have? Sort of what are the kinds of social metrics that we can use to help establish trust? Number three, the analytics and metrics are going to be important. So looking at campaigns, being able to aggregate campaigns across a country or across a region or across an industry, those are already being formed as well, and will be incredibly powerful. There's a company based in the U.S., but they have platforms that they work with in the U.S. and Europe called Crowdfunding. And they are essentially a combination of Orbitz and Bloomberg for the crowdfunding space. And it's an opportunity to have all that data aggregated in one place, and then for investors to be able to look at the types of industries, deals, and investments that they want to make across many different platforms. And then fourth, we just call it kind of white space, meaning this kind of empty, vacant space that we don't know what's going to happen next in. Because there will be many new innovations that occur, just as we've already experienced in every other sector of the web. I mean, we all can name a lot of services or things that we use today on the web that we never knew we needed before. I mean, one that I see constantly on public transportation is Candy Crush. I mean, these games that occupy hundreds of hours of time, but there'll be actually tools or things that people will use, whether it's entertainment, games, ways to engage the youth through education in financial services. I mean, education is a huge, huge issue. And I do think, to the earlier question, countries that begin now to think about how do you incorporate financial education, investing education as part of secondary, high school education, as well as college, is very, very important. So, now I want to step back and talk about this conversation, because it's a conversation that will need to occur over time. It's been alluded to by His Excellency from Cambodia, His Excellency from Thailand, this conversation between regulators and entrepreneurs and investors. And I just want to share some of our experience. Like when we first went to Washington, D.C., we were three guys who were entrepreneurs, and we were not lobbyists. And these are the kinds of things that we were told. Look, the House and Senate will never agree. Don't waste your time. What can three guys get done in Washington? Who's going to pay for this? It turns out we did. And then mostly, you're crazy. Right? You're just crazy for doing this. You shouldn't do it. Go back and do another IT startup. It's fine. We managed to get it done with the help of a lot of people. We had a lot of good timing. We had good luck, and we worked with some really great people to make it happen. And I want to just share the 6 lessons that we learned as part of this process that I think are universal from the experiences that I've had so far. One, the importance of putting a stake in the ground. So that's a saying in English that really is just saying, go with a proposal, meaning many times people will go to government and go to regulators and say, I have a problem I want you to solve. My suggestion would be create a solution, a proposed solution that you can then go to the regulators, go to the government ministers and say, here's an idea we have for how to solve this problem for access to capital that works here. And then you can begin to have that conversation about that idea. Whether or not you agree or not, at the end, you begin the conversation in an effective way. Number 2, the power of showing up in person. It's really easy today sometimes with Twitter conversations and email and video chats and all those kinds of things, and they're all great. I use them all every day. We all do. But there's nothing like showing up in person and having a conversation with someone face-to-face about these kinds of issues. Number 3, sell what people are buying. I know this sounds really obvious. It took us a while to figure it out. In talking with elected officials in Washington, D.C. in 2011, at the depths of the financial crisis with 10% unemployment in the U.S., what people were buying at that time were jobs and job creation. And so we sold job creation to make this happen. And so I think that that's just a really important thing of sell what people are buying. Stay on policy and out of politics. Every country has complicated political situations, and ours is certainly, crazy. But we could have been pulled in either direction, for whether it be Republicans or Democrats. We didn't do that. We stayed only on policy. And at every opportunity when people tried to pull us into a political conversation, we just stayed on policy and right down the middle, and we're here for jobs, we're here for innovation, we're here for crowdfunding. And so I think that's definitely a word of advice I would have, is to stay on policy. Success has many fathers and mothers. Just the fact that there are going to be many, many people involved in this effort. And so having a big tent as possible, having a big of a coalition as possible as you're moving these efforts through is very important. And the last one, as an entrepreneur, you sort of measure life in minutes and hours. Government tends to measure time in months and years. And so it's about how you sort of understand each other's perspectives. As an entrepreneur, I now understand why government moves at a different pace, because as an entrepreneur, you can ask for forgiveness much more easily than if you're a government minister having to ask for forgiveness. It's a very different kind of decision matrix that you have to manage. And so really it's about understanding the different perspectives that you're coming to these conversations with, and I think that will allow you to have a very productive conversation over the period of time that's required. But I do think that, the time for action is now. The time for action and leadership in the region is now. And it's very encouraging to see this group and so much activity around this. So the framework that we've developed over the last 2.5 years in this work is looking at how you have to balance these 4 audiences, and this sort of balanced stakeholder framework that we call it, because that's really what's very important in understanding, you've got these competing interests, and you just sort of think of it as a tabletop, and you're trying to manage the balancing it all out. Number one, the top priority, protecting investors. Now, how you 100% protect investors is never let them invest in anything. But then how do you manage that risk versus reward opportunity? And because you're having to balance that against providing enough capital to businesses. Third is transparency for a regulator. What the panel said earlier today, and certainly what Doug has said on other panels, what he's spoken at all over the world, is that this really is this opportunity to do it better than we've ever done it before, because it will be online, and it will be searchable, and it will have the ability to have these digital footprints of exactly what happened in every deal. The fact that if you say, well, you never told me that you were going to have this kind of business, but it's obvious that when we look at the history, that you did go to those pages on my business plan, you read exactly what I did, you printed it out, and so it will reduce this some of this friction that takes place, and it will allow the regulator to have really much better knowledge of what's happening in their country. And then finally, enablement for platforms. And so not only the platforms, the crowdfunding platforms, because they have to have enough room to breathe, they have to have the ability to do business, they have to have the ability to make a profit, they have the ability to grow. And so the regulator needs to try to create a new model for regulation. And there's a way that it was described in the UK, and they've done a really good job there, of creating a policy that is data intensive and prescriptively light. How can you create a balanced approach, use the data that's available on crowdfunding platforms to be able to then allow you to make adjustments in regulation over time? And so that's sort of that enablement for platforms. Another kind of enablement is one that is important, especially in developing economies, which are development organizations, whether it's the Asian Development Bank or it is the entrepreneurial investment part of the government in a country, or it's the World Bank or other institutions who play a large role in developing entrepreneurship in a country. They also have to sort of how does crowdfunding, they add that to their model. And co-investment was one thing that was talked about a little bit earlier. The UK government has this really interesting, they've now deployed over 40 million British pounds and a co-investment model on debt-based crowdfunding in the UK. We also think there could be some very interesting models that could be deployed like that in other countries or with other sorts of entrepreneurship development organizations. So an example would be an entrepreneurship organization today in a country that has $10 million to deploy equivalent, and they don't, it's very difficult to understand, how do I know as the person sitting at that desk exactly which entrepreneurs are going to be the best entrepreneurs to give that money to? But if I can co-invest with the crowd, if I can say to this entrepreneur, put it on this crowdfunding platform, you get to 70% of your goal, I will invest the last 30%. I, the entrepreneurship organization, will invest that last 30%. Will take you across the finish line so you can then have your business, because you've proved to me that in addition to all the diligence I've done on you to know who your business is, I know that you have a customer. You have people who have been willing to invest their money with you as well. You have a community of people behind you, and I will then, as a custodian of this money, I will then invest as well. So I think there's a lot of interesting co-investment models that can be created. And so there's also a number of best practices and really open questions that are still here. This is all still very new. And so, these best practices are really ones that, just have been developed in countries around the world in these conversations. But then the open questions are really around the issues that are required to customize crowdfunding and crowdfund investing to each country, and to each culture, and to each region. And so those are the kinds of things that really need to be modulated so that they're appropriate and effective in every country. So those are kind of my comments for today. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I'm happy to answer questions if we've got some time for questions as well.
My name is Andy. Does crowdfunding at its core, the portal, the platform, does it need to be a non-profit a motivated idea, and basically to keep it from morphing into yet another perverted investment banking model where deals are kept, the good ones, and the bad ones are kind of released? Is that just something that will happen naturally, whereby some platforms will be better than others because they have access to better deals, and some will not be? Thank you.
I think crowdfunding should be absolutely for profit. I think that there are certainly, organizations like Kiva, organizations that are focused on not-for-profit kinds of crowdfunding, I think should exist and absolutely have a role to play. Where we spend our energies and our time is building up the kind of the for-profit debt and equity crowdfunding spaces to be able to allow that. I think that not all crowdfunding platforms are going to succeed. The most important element in a successful crowdfunding platform, it's having access to investors. There are no shortage of entrepreneurs looking for capital. The biggest issue is, can you entice investors to come to your platform to invest once, and can you entice them to invest again and again and again? And so that's really the big issue, is showing good deals. And so when people are thinking about platform, another business model is to think about how can you aggregate investors and then deliver them to crowdfunding platforms in an effective way. So there's a lot of different models here, but I do think that there will always continue to be non-for-profit models. There will always be rewards-based models that allow you to do product pre-sale, like Kickstarter. And they'll always, and then hopefully soon we will have globally available this opportunity to do equity and debt crowdfunding. I think one of the other opportunities for equity and debt crowdfunding is you will finally have, the market will be large enough so that, because today cross-border money flows is very challenging in most countries. It's either difficult or impossible for a number of reasons. But I think that's because there have been so few entities that were large enough, that had the capabilities to make the transactions large enough to make those costs worth doing. As crowdfunding becomes legal, and the markets build, you will create a demand for these cross-border financial flows that have never existed before. We will then have the technology available to monitor those flows and provide the kinds of connectivity for regulation to occur among those different countries has never been possible before, but is possible today. And so, that's a really important point. One of the important things about that is the opportunity for diaspora investment. I can't tell you how many countries we've been to where there is someone within the Ministry of State, Ministry of Economy, who is responsible for engagement of the diaspora from that country in driving either talent, money, or both back to the country. And this is a critical point with crowdfunding. You have this opportunity. There have been studies that the World Bank did in the Caribbean of the Caribbean diaspora in Europe and the US, and there was a strong desire to invest back in their home country or in the region in opportunities. The challenge was trust and transparency and monitoring. But when those investors were shown crowdfunding and talked about this opportunity, they all said they were willing to experiment with it. They were willing to try it because it offered them a way to have that transparency they never had before. Yes.
My name is Supiep. I'm from the National Institute of Telecom and ICT from Cambodia. As an education institution, we also change the way the message that we give to the students. Before, we tell our students that, hey, student, work hard, study hard, try to have a very good score, and then you will get good jobs. Now, what we're trying to tell the student is that study hard, try to be creative, and let's start something. Let's start something. Let's create jobs and not just look for jobs. So I have two simple questions. The first is it safe for an educational institution to tell students that crowdfunding is a safe way to start a business? And my second question is that it's more general. Is, in your point of view, is a business that receives seed funding via crowdfunding mechanisms, they have more chance of success compared to a conventional way of seed funding via VC capital, investment capital, or a small group investor? Because in conventional way, you have more pressure, you have more control in terms of performance that force you to deliver performance. So as far as we can see in the success story of crowdfunding, what you are selling to people is perhaps emotions of wanting to contribute to create something new and not just the business itself. As perhaps our previous question is also, crowdfunding is just about selling an emotion to people, or it is a really successful business, and if you compare the conventional way of seeking capital, is it more efficient? Thank you.
As far as what I would say to entrepreneurs, I think it's difficult to say anything is going to make it a safe way to start a business. I think that I think crowdfunding can be a very effective way to raise capital for a business. It's also a difficult way to raise capital for a business. But I don't know of any time it's ever been easy to raise money for a business. I say often that crowdfunding is not an easy way to raise money, it's just a new way to do a very difficult thing, which is raising money for a business. And so it's just that it provides an avenue and access to more people in a more efficient way than has ever been possible before. And the second part of your question was really more around the process. Mm-hmm. Now we have 1,000 of digital investors, and they have until now they have key performance my question in that. So as far as performance and how do you monitor it, number one, it goes back to what I said earlier about ecosystem company opportunities, the chance to create a dashboard for crowdfunding companies to allow them to have key performance indicators for the companies on their platform. Because as a platform, I need to create a reason for you to keep coming back and using my service. Because if I only have you use my service just to raise money and then you go away forever, I've lost the lifetime value of you as a customer. I want to create tools for my crowdfunding platform that you can use over the life of your business. And so investor relations tools are certainly one of those things. This opportunity to have investor relations in a new way. Another thing from a voting perspective, what we've also seen are the opportunities to create special purpose vehicles. So you would create a special purpose vehicle, and all of the small investors could be in one pool represented by a single person who would then represent those interests. And so that could be another model that may be effective. So you could, one of the investors could be selected as the person who maybe has the most investing experience and be the leader of that investing group and then go forward. We've also seen models where you'll have someone who maybe is a traditional angel investor, and they will have the opportunity, they will maybe price the round, they will say they will be the lead investor, and then they'll have other people that will follow them. And tomorrow there's a panel at the end of the day that will talk more about kind of how venture capital and incubators and accelerators and crowdfunding, kind of angel investing kind of all fits together. Okay, I'm being told I'm all out of time. Lunch is ready. And I just I'd just like to add my thanks to Hansing and for this organization and for this day to happen today. And we'll look forward to chatting with you all over the course of the next day and a half. Thank you.